Here we are looking at Leonardo da Vinci's Virgin or Madonna of the Rocks. Now I've given you the two variations. You're going to see this as either Madonna of the Rocks or Virgin of the Rocks. And I want you to remember that Virgin and Madonna are referring to the same person, the mother of Jesus, Mary. And Madonna, it translates to Our Lady. So we're looking at Virgin of the Rocks or Madonna of the Rocks. Another thing, it's called of the rocks, not on the rocks. This is not a cocktail served over ice. What it is an altarpiece, and it was paid for by the Duke of Milan to a confraternity in Milan. A confraternity is kind of like a gentleman's organization or well, like I said, a fraternity. And what we have here is the Virgin Mary and her son, baby Jesus. We have John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, and an angel. And they're placed here in this grotto. The grotto is a wet, rocky outcrop or cave. And so that's why we have the name, Madonna of the Rocks. Got it? Good. Now let's take a look at it in terms of a composition. We have the figures placed in the front or the foreground, and then we have this rocky landscape in the middle ground, and then way in the distance we see this blue fog coming in, right? What we have is a balanced composition. It's a characteristic of the Renaissance. What we have is not linear perspective with these clear lines to a horizon and a vanishing point, but what we do have is a clear placement of the figures in the foreground or the front. There is a clear middle ground, clear as in it's not obscured, it's not shortened, it's not hidden. And then there is a background, that far off distance of rocks. So let's write this down as a characteristic of the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, what we see is a balance of a middle ground, or a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. Not everything is pushed up to the front, and not everything is pushed up to the back. Got it? How does he give us such a distant background? What's that vocabulary word? Look through your notes. What is it? What is it? It is, yep, atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective. Now I've highlighted here this detail. You see how the rocks, as they get farther away, they become more blue-green, hazy, and then we see the fog rolling in. Now consider if he hadn't used atmospheric perspective. If he hadn't used atmospheric perspective and he had just painted those rocks to be the same kind of brown that we see in the foreground, well then we wouldn't register that as an opening. Instead, it would make the space seem very closed off, very small, very contained, very unbalanced. Instead, by giving us atmospheric perspective, he opens the space beyond the grotto, far, far, far into the distance, giving us a balance of background, middle ground, foreground. Another characteristic of the Renaissance that we see in the work is, I'm giving you this as a clue, highlights, midtones, shadows. The figures are all modeled with a clear balance of highlights, midtones, and shadows. What's that vocabulary word? Chiaroscuro. Yes. So this space, a grotto, it would seem to be very dark, very full of shadow, but that's not the case here. Instead, each of the figures is properly lit. They're not too bright, they're not too dark. There's a balance of highlights, midtones, and shadows. And I give you this detail of the angel just because, look at the gorgeous sleeve here. Look at how, when done correctly, the modeling of the figure in chiaroscuro can hide and reveal the body and the fabric in such a way it's just mesmerizing, isn't it? Look at that beautiful hand of Mary modeled with chiaroscuro. So that's another characteristic, isn't it? Another characteristic of the Renaissance is chiaroscuro. So we have atmospheric perspective, chiaroscuro, and a balance of composition with a clear foreground, middle ground, and background. Let's go back here. Now, I typically don't emphasize the materials unless it's important, and I've emphasized it here. I've highlighted it. This is painted oil on wood. So it's a wood panel, and then the paint is oil paint. This is something that I want to call to your attention, because oil paint was not widely used in the Renaissance until Leonardo. Well, I should say, it was not widely used in the Italian Renaissance until Leonardo. Oil paint, which is pigments mixed in a binder of oil, typically walnut oil or linseed oil. Oil paint had been invented and was widely used in Northern Europe during the Renaissance, but not really taken up by Italian Renaissance artists. However, Leonardo saw the benefits of oil paint, and he would widely use it in his work. What are the benefits? Well, one of the benefits of oil paint is that it can blend very well. Say you have two distinct colors, a green and a blue, but you want to have a green-blue. It's difficult to make a smooth transition using tempera paints, but it can be easily blended or transitioned together using oil paint. Another benefit of oil paint is the fact that oil paint can be applied in these very thin layers or glazes. And each of these layers can be built upon not only to create these modulations of color, but also the light will come in and pass through the transparent oil, which creates a much more luminous or vibrant color. Tempera paint can be very dense and very dull or matte-like in appearance, not very shiny. And oil paint, because of its nature, has a brighter, almost tactile light to the quality of paint, or the quality of the subject. Does that make sense? Anyways, what we have here is an image of the altarpiece as it stands now in the National Gallery in London. And you know how I want you to visit all of these museums. I want you to go travel the world. I want you to see the artworks we talk about. Go to the National Gallery. When I was there in 2019, I had completely forgotten that she, the Madonna of the Rocks, is there. And then I took this video. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot that she's here. And then, right after this video, a guard came rushing into the room and told me to put my video away. So, okay. Let's look at another element of this artwork. So the figures are placed in what we are going to call a pyramidal composition. So I've given you the definition here. Pyramidal composition is a composition based upon the pyramid. It endows a sense of calmness and stability and space. So these four figures are placed at the four corners of a pyramid base, and then the apex being the top of the Virgin Mary's head. It's difficult for you to recognize here. See, is that more helpful? So what Leonardo's created is a three-dimensional space in the foreground or at the front. And what this does for our eye is it allows us a resting spot. I literally called it a base. The four figures are placed in this base that nestle our eye visually. It keeps us from having to move around in some kind of a chaotic space. It creates a sense of visual stability and calmness. And isn't that appropriate to these figures? Because what we're looking at here is the Virgin Mary and she has placed a hand, a gentle hand, on the back of her young nephew and John the Baptist. And here we have Jesus, who is giving this gesture of a blessing and looking at John. And then Mary, her hand placed over Jesus, also acts as a gesture of protection or reverence. So we have these figures, and our eye is nestled into this moment of blessing and reverence and protection using the pyramidal composition. Did you notice also that I was talking about gesture? Yes, gesture. Gesture, if you remember, was another characteristic of the Renaissance. So we have already seen balance, which gives us the display of logic and harmony. We've already seen the composition of circles and squares. And then I said we were going to start looking at gesture more closely. Well, when we look at Leonardo's Madonna of the Rocks, there is a lot of gesture. First, the angel looks out at us, at the viewer. Now, I've also included here, this is a sketch from one of Leonardo's journals as he was working on this altar. So you can see that it was very specific and intentional to have this androgynous angel looking out at the viewer. What this does is it pulls us into the scene. I want you to be aware of that. When an artist makes a figure in the scene look out, it's a way to call your attention and pull you in. So we are visually pulled into this space through the angel. And then, what is the angel's gesture? What do you see happening here? The angel is pulling you in and then is saying, look. And that gesture of the hand, we immediately follow it. Our eye will then follow that gesture down. Oh, John the Baptist. Okay. But then where's John the Baptist looking? And what is this gesture? Where he's in a gesture of prayer. Well, what is he praying to? We look and follow his eye down. So you see that how gesture has pulled us in and pulled us across. And then we see Jesus. And Jesus here with his symbol of blessing then is looking back at John the Baptist. So we have this beautiful triangular effect. If we rise up over these hands, the blessing, the point, then we then have the mother, the Virgin Mary, and her gesture, this kind of, like I said before, this reverence or protection. Not only does it give us a relationship of her to her son, but look at how she looks down at him. So again, we have that reverence and protection. And remember, in the composition, she is the apex of this. And so our eye will then lead up, but she encourages our eye to look down, touch back down into the space. So pyramidal composition and gesture are more characteristics that we see in the Renaissance. These are all different rules that can be applied. And I say rules because at this time, using these elements were seen as making a good painting. A good painting should have a balance of highlights, midtones, and shadows, chiaroscuro. A good painting should have a balance of a foreground, middle ground, background. A good painting should use a pyramidal composition to create a sense of balance and stability between the figures. So here we see Leonardo applying those rules, and these are all characteristic of the Renaissance. Before we leave, one more thing. There are two versions. Here, let me get out of the way. There are two versions of the Madonna of the Rocks. The first, or what historians believe to be the oldest, the original version, is now at the Louvre in Paris. And then a second version, a later done version, is at the National Gallery in London. The story behind these two versions, well, what we think happened was that Leonardo painted this originally and then sold it. And in order to meet or to fulfill the commission, he had to make a new one. And so that he made the second one. For a while there, and what you might see in a lot of discussion about these two artworks, many people did believe that the original was by Leonardo and that the second was done by a student of Leonardo. However, historians are arguing that while there may have been assistance in the painting, that Leonardo did have a hand in the second version as well.